Welcome to the Art of Procurement podcast with your host, Philip Eidson. Here, thought leaders share the trends, strategies, and tactics that you can use to elevate the role of procurement and your career.
Hi there, and thank you so much for joining me and listening in to another episode of the Art of Procurement. And my guest today is Gordon Donovan. Gordon is presently actually a member of the procurement leadership team at Metro Trains in Melbourne, and he has a broad range of experiences as a practitioner, including head of procurement roles, and also as a consultant and as a trainer. Gordon's career spans both the UK and Australia, includes roles at organisations such as the UK National Health Service, the NHS, Transport for London, Healthscope, ArcBlue and The Faculty. And I first became aware of Gordon through his writing, actually. We connected probably about 6 months ago for the first time. But since then, he's become a friend. And I'm really delighted he accepted my invitation to join me on the show. Today, we're going to discuss influence. So we've talked about this a little bit on the show before, from a sales and a marketing perspective, also from a functional perspective in terms of category management. But today I want to go a little bit deeper. And I'm willing to say that there's few, if any, really, who have studied the topic of influence and procurement as thoroughly as Gordon. So he wrote a 20,000-word dissertation, which he actually forwarded to me before the show. It was about 96 pages, I think, for his master's degree on the topic of the development of influencing skills, specifically within the Australian procurement community. And so as we run the interview, I do hope that you enjoy Gordon's insights as much as I did. Before I do start the show, there is one more thing that I wanted to share with you. It's an important announcement for the Art of Procurement. You know, I teased this during the recent Friday show when I talked about what's next for the Art of Procurement. I made reference to the fact I was working on an opportunity for you to help me in taking Art of Procurement to the next level. And so today I'm bringing crowdfunding to procurement thought leadership and launching the Art of Procurement Patron program. And the program is an opportunity for you to help me to fund the growth of the show and also fund the continued accessibility of procurement thought leadership, you know, the people that we have that are able to give up their time to speak to us all as a community. So if you feel like you get value from the show, and obviously I really hope that you do feel that way and that's why you're listening, then I would just truly appreciate if you were able to get involved. So the Patron program, let me tell you a little bit about it. It starts at $5 a month with a gold membership at $25 a month. And I've also corporate packages available where procurement organizations or service providers can help fund the production of an episode, for example, or buy memberships for their entire team. And packages will include bonus content, such as insider newsletters, bringing back the transcripts from the shows, and a video library of short procurement tips. So think of it as, you know, looking at tips and tricks and strategies that have been brought to us by the thought leaders in the shows, packaging them up into a way that they're much more searchable and accessible so you can access the help you need exactly when you need it. There's also going to be packages that include one-on-one coaching and accountability programs with myself. I'll be honest and say that the future growth of the Art of Procurement, I think, is really dependent upon the support from across the procurement community. And I'd love for you to check out the program. If you go to artofprocurement.com/patron, that's Patron, so artofprocurement.com/patron, then you'll be redirected to our page and a short video on the Patreon crowdfunding website, which is where we're actually hosting this campaign. If you're a head of procurement or a leader at a procurement service provider, please consider the corporate patron packages. That enables you to really position yourself as an investor in the growth of the procurement community. So that address, one more time, is artofprocurement.com/patron. And we're going to be running this program all the way through December, so please get involved. Okay then, well, without further ado, let's go to the conversation with Gordon. I hope you enjoy the show. Hi there everybody, and welcome to another episode of The Art of Procurement. And as I mentioned in my introduction, I'm delighted to welcome Gordon Donovan to the show today. Gordon, thanks for joining me.
Oh, thanks for inviting me, Phil. Very much looking forward to it.
And so this is the first, at least the time that we record today, that the Art of Procurement is coming from Australia and from Melbourne. So what's ironic is that while we're both opposite sides of the Pacific, I think when I was looking at the map, our hometowns in England are probably about 50 miles from each other.
Yeah, just the Pennines separating us.
I know, and it's funny, when you're in England, you have the War of the Roses, and as a Yorkshireman like I am, I'm taught never to talk to a Lancastrian, which survived until I went to university in Lancashire. But then when you get out of the country, where suddenly 50 miles apart is nothing, and you suddenly comrades rather than enemies. So
there's an English mafia thing going on, isn't
right. So something actually we talked about before we rolled the tape, but it was something that was interesting. It was interesting to me, not necessarily from an Australian perspective, but just as a procurement professional, with kind of understanding where we are as a profession around the world. I was interested to know, what are the characteristics of the procurement market right now in Australia and how it's kind of evolved over the last 10 or 15 years?
I think the biggest thing that probably drives the Australian procurement market is that most of the supply markets here are quite distorted. Mm-hmm. Because although we're a massive landmass, the population's relatively small. It's about 24, 25 million, something along those lines. So you've not actually got an awful lot of consumers for people's products, and you lay that with a bit of history as to previously until Bob Hawke and Paul Keating became prime ministers. It was quite isolated, might be the wrong word, but it was certainly quite protectionist, and so there was quite high tariffs, high taxation into imported goods, and it was quite regulated. And so what they did is they deregulated an awful lot of what was going on. They brought in some foreign ownership, and that actually then created the procurement function, if you like, as it started. And there's some interesting documents going around on the history of Australian procurement, which was published by SIPS in about 2006, 2007. So in terms of the characteristics that we see now, I would say that most supply markets are quite distorted. Traditional approaches of like bundling things together have helped to create that distortion, as well as the geographical location. Right. I think that because of that, some of the more entrepreneurial procurement strategies have a lot of roots sort of laid in Australia. There's been quite a high rise in terms of low-cost country sourcing and that global sourcing. Certainly the drive for sort of understanding the deeper relationships with suppliers is something that's becoming a lot more prevalent in the Australian market. If you take a look at ROSMA, which is a sort of global benchmarking study, Australian procurement, the better Australian procurement organisations lead in compliance, but they lag in coverage and in speed, which is probably seen a drive more for technology to help basically drive the speed and also increase the coverage. Right. So I think the finding from that is that when Australian procurement gets embedded into organisations, people are pretty good at following the rules, but actually getting there in the first place is proving a little difficult.
Bringing it back to your procurement career, how did you get started in procurement? Was it something that you sought, or did it choose you?
Probably a little of both, really. My dad was a sales manager. He sold advertising space. Right. So whilst you might automatically think of Mad Men for that, I can tell you, according to my father, it was nothing like Mad Men whatsoever, which was, I think, disappointing to him more than anything else.
I wonder what the procurement equivalent of Mad Men would be.
That's, you know what, there's an opportunity there, isn't there? Yeah. So, let's say Dad was sales. I left school, and in the UK, I left school at 16. And in the UK, when I was 16, which was X number of years ago, there was a scheme called the Youth Trainee Scheme, the YTS it was called. And my first rotation was in a warehouse at Manchester Airport, duty-free stores. And my first rotation was in a warehouse, in a bonded warehouse. And then I did a rotation in a duty-paid warehouse, and then there was some accounts and also the actual ordering and the reconciliation. What we would now see is the P2P piece going on. That kind of got me hooked a little bit, and then my first real job about a year later, when the YTS finished, I was a junior buyer, a clerical officer for the Northwest Regional Health Authority Purchasing Department. December the 18th, 1989.
Yeah, you remember it well.
I do remember it well because a week later we're on holiday. So it's a bit of both, I'd say.
And so, you've been in and out of, being a practitioner, being a consultant, I think, for, a number of years in your career, and you keep kind of dipping in from one and the other. Have you seen a difference in the kind of help that procurement organizations are looking for? Is it pretty stable? Is where we are today much different from where we were 5 years ago, 10 years ago?
It's a good question. I think in terms of what people, the constancy of what people look for and the help that they require is benchmarking. Mm-hmm. How are they doing against others, both locally and more importantly, certainly for the larger organizations, it's the global benchmarking that they find incredibly useful. And it's the ideas that the other organizations are doing that they can then internalize a little bit and try and figure out how are they going to be able to deploy these types of thoughts, these types of ideas in my organization, what works and what doesn't work. That's pretty constant. And the need, I think, for procurement leaders to understand where they sit in relation to others has been the case for certainly since I've been in consulting, really, which is over the last sort of 10 years more than anything else. But in terms of the specifics, you go back 5-7 years, it was category management.
Yeah.
It was all, what are we going to do? How do we do category management? And to some degree, there's still that requirement on what do we do with category management? What does it actually mean? I read an article about someone had written why category management has failed. And I think possibly it's because possibly the consultants are to blame for this maybe, but everyone maybe has their own definition of category management, and therefore it's specific to every organisation. Therefore, category management is just something that people are already doing, and it's just putting another label on it. I think at the moment, software support is big, and I think that links back to the fact that the speed and the coverage areas that are identified as Australian procurement will maybe lagging a little bit. So software help, software implementation, assessments as to whether or not they're going to be able to get the benefits. Again, it's linking back to benchmarking a little bit, but we're finding, or I found that there was certainly a need that people thought that they needed some software support, but they didn't know what it was, and they didn't know how to get themselves ready to actually take best use of these software supports. And then I think always people are interested in operating models, and from centralized to decentralized to clan to hybrid systems. And again, that's understanding how technology is going to allow them to concentrate on different areas. So it's quite cyclical, certainly around the organizational structure. When I started in procurement, properly in procurement in the Health Authority, which was 1989, as I said, we were kind of a hybrid system. So the regions were all had a central procurement department, but there wasn't a national procurement department. Yeah. And about 4 or 5 years later, it went national, and then it went completely decentralized and pushed back, and then it comes national again, and then it goes decentralized. So it is very, very cyclical.
When you think about the skills then that we need as we continue to evolve, I taught about my view that I think that, we need to look at our value proposition and continue to evolve it to remain relevant. But to do that, we might be limited just in terms of capability, just because the capabilities, in my perspective at least, look different for driving procurement forward, today or tomorrow than they may have done in the past. I know that you've had a lot of background both from procurement transformation programs, but also in terms of leading capability development programs. Am I in the right place? Is that fair? I'm interested to know if you agree or disagree that skill sets are changing.
I think they absolutely are changing. Yeah, I think they absolutely are. I think technology is allowing the skill sets to evolve, because the things that we may have used to have been doing ourselves manually or through Microsoft are becoming a lot more automated, which is therefore going to allow us to do different things. Which requires a different skill set. I think as the need for procurement to align themselves with organisational goals means that we need to understand what those goals are. So therefore there's a lot more in terms of strategic thinking and considering how we're going to put together things and how procurement is going to operate to actually drive some of those goals and enable the business to do what they need. I think communication skills are an absolute must. I think the days of people sat in the corner. And
Right.
one of my old bosses, a guy called Andy, used to call it the brown cardigan brigade. Those days hopefully are extinct, if not heading that way. And I think we just need to be a bit more vibrant and being able to communicate in a language that other people understand. I think that's one of the biggest knocks on procurement,
Right.
is that we seem to drive this insular sort of world where, you know, what we do is really technical and it's really hard for others to understand it, and therefore just leave us alone and let us do what we need. And I think those skill sets are changing. I think we need to demystify procurement in some ways and allow people to understand exactly what value it is that we're delivering, and also what value we can deliver, because there's a vast untapped potential that procurement can help deliver for organizations. You know, wanting to move into new markets, then procurement should already be there because they're potentially buying from those markets.
Right.
So I remember Jonathan O'Brien in his book about category management talking about that, and it's absolutely true. And I think that's some of the areas that procurement can drive value. So I agree. Procurement skill sets are evolving, and I think you prefer the word evolution,
Right.
rather than transformation, because I think it is that. I think it's more evolution now, and I think it's a continuum that not just procurement but every function goes through. I think when I started it's not even called human resources. That was personnel, and it was human resources, and now it's people and performance. It's an evolution.
You know, so you said something then about demystifying what we do. And, you know, I always have this conversation, or I often have this conversation where I talk to people and say, you know, it's not rocket science what we do. It's relatively straightforward, but then we make it sound a lot more complicated than it really is. Do you think that's because we're trying to be protectionist? And that, you know, if we make it seem more complicated than it really is, then people will just leave us alone to get on with it?
Yes. You know, the answer to your question, I 100% agree with that. I think, and we're not alone. I think there's other departments that do exactly the same thing. But I think it absolutely is. And I think we should do the exact opposite. I think we should simplify it. I think we should make people aware that the hard parts are thinking about the strategies and how we can actually dovetail in with other functions and other departments within an organisation. I think sharing the ability to deliver some of the sourcing work, this is where software, this is where technology is going to help us do that. And I think we can just become a lot more valuable to organisations because we have insights into supply markets that nobody else does.
We talk about it being complicated. Do you think because we talk about it being complicated, we believe it's complicated? And maybe it's kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy that we think that it is more complex ourselves than it really is.
I think sometimes we're guilty of making it harder than it really is. I mean, in some ways, the vast majority of things that we do are let's say straightforward, but especially the more that you do it, obviously, you know, the more you do something, the better you get at it. You know, that's true of everything apart from golf, I think you'll find.
I'll second that.
So I think sometimes it is a self-fulfilling prophecy, and I think we get caught up sometimes in the more technical aspects of things rather than probably trying to break through that and without wishing to be too consultancy, but, you know, begin with the end in mind is something that has really driven me throughout my career. What is it that we're trying to achieve? And then the quickest way there is generally a straight line.
Yeah, and it's not necessarily trying to belittle what it is that we do, because a lot of what we do is very hard, and that's why it needs the capabilities that we're all trying to strive to achieve. But there's so much of what we do that is relatively straightforward, that is essentially a process, facilitation of process, that is probably easier, that we do need to demystify.
The facilitation skills are just so important.
Right.
And there's multiple ways to facilitate things, but essentially what we're obviously seeking to do is understand what our business wants, what our business needs from this potential transaction, and helping to identify how that links into the other strategies. Friend of mine, I'll give him a name check, Paul Rogers, used to run and say one of the fundamental things we have to do is answer the SPI skills question. What is it that you want? What is it that you really, really want? I think that's the key thing that we need to start with.
Right.
So, you know, one of the key things we've got to consider in facilitation skills is how we're going to influence the people in the room to get to where we want to get to. And that's not necessarily to get them to do what we want.
Right.
That's possibly one of them. But how are we going to influence people to actually share with everybody else in the room what it is that we're trying to achieve? And that's a really key skill.
Yeah, and you've taught a lot and written a lot about influence. So I'm interested, we all maybe think of influence as being different things, and it's kind of like what you said about category management. It might mean something different to everybody who talks about it. How do you define influence?
I think influence has got two definitions. I think there's a functional influence, and I think there's influencing skills. For me, functional influence is around having influence within an organization over strategic decisions which you may not actually directly influence, but being able to have that conversation contributes to your organization's success. So I think there's a functional influence. And my drive in general from a procurement function would be for the CEOs and CFOs and COOs and any other thing beginning with C, when they're considering organizational goals and strategy, that I want them to think, wonder what procurement thinks about this. Let's speak to procurement. I think if we get that, we've won.
Yeah.
And then I think there's actually influencing skills, which is all around recognizing how I'm going to change people's behavior, how I'm going to maybe persuade them. Goldman talks about wielding effective tactics of persuasion, which is quite an interesting phrase. So persuasion for me and influencing are kind of hand in hand.
So, are there different types of influencing? Are there different influencing styles? Because, I imagine that lots of people get to that goal, but they take different paths to get there.
There are. There's lots of different styles that you can choose from. And I think we need to consider how we're going to deploy them all. So one that I like, which is from McGregor and Robertson, talks about reason, assertiveness, exchanges or like bargaining, if you like, coercion. Let's be clear. Threats. Right. Threats are an absolute. They're not a favourite one of mine. I think negotiation is a link of some of those things. Clearly, anyone with kids will tell you that when you're talking about influencing, you can use all the greatest logic in the world. It's not a logical decision when it's time for bed.
I can tell you about that from personal experience right now. I've given up in trying to influence at this point.
I say to people in training programs that I run that the best negotiators in the world are kids, because they use emotion, and they are persistent with a capital P.
Yeah, and they usually get what they want at the end of the day.
Yes, anything for a quiet life, right?
I know. So do you have to match, or does it make sense for you to match different styles with different types of people that you're trying to influence? Because something may work with one person. The coercion, unfortunately, may work with one person where trying to inspire them may not. How do you kind of figure out what's the best approach based on the person you're trying to influence?
I think you've got to get to know the person. So the key skill here is listening, because the person themselves will tell you how best to influence them. I think we need to understand how to use those styles. There's different types of influencing styles. I think we need to understand which ones we are better at, and I think we need to understand the people that we're trying to influence and the people that we're trying to communicate with. We have to understand what's the best way to communicate and to influence those people. Because as you rightly say, everybody's different. Everyone's an individual. Monty Python may have said that at some point. And so we have to understand what's the best way to influence them. There's a great story in Muhammad Ali's autobiography, and it's about how Angelo Dundee influenced Ali. Previously, when he first started professional boxing, he went through a few trainers, including the guy who ended up training Joe Frazier. And they all tried to tell Ali what they wanted to do. Yeah. Which we don't need to know Ali to know that telling Ali what to do.
It's probably not going to listen.
No, he's not going to listen. He's not going to work. No. What Dundee's did was basically he made him think it was his own idea. He made him think he was already doing it. So at the end of a round, he would come back and say, the way that you're moving to your left now is just sensational. Or the way that you're snapping out that jab now is just brilliant. And he'd go out the next round and do it because he believed that he was already doing it, and therefore he was in charge of it. So you could say that was slightly deceitful, or you could say it was recognizing that a way to influence that person was to turn around allow them to consider the fact that they've come up with themselves.
Right.
So, and I'm not convinced it's a power thing either. I just think everybody has got a different style that works.
Yeah.
And I also think it's situational. So listening, understanding the individual and understanding the context that you're trying to influence is very, very key.
What would you say your primary style of influencing is then?
Mine, I would say I try and make people very relaxed if I'm trying to influence them. I try and get comfort and make people aware that there's some level of knowledge here, and it could be through building that trust over a period of time. And I think developing trust is absolutely the foundation block for being able to influence. And I know what I don't do. I know I don't do coercion very well. I'm not the greatest one at threatening, mainly because I'm never convinced I'm going to back it up, and I'm fairly sure that comes out.
It's a very short-term thinking, though, as well, to use that approach, isn't it? Because
it is.
You're basically doing it on fear, not because people believe that what you're saying is something that they want to do themselves or that they want to follow.
Yeah, and I think if you look at great managers and leaders, then there might be an undercurrent of fear, but it's more an inspirational thing. You look at when people talk about, and I've read Parcells' autobiography and Lombardi's autobiography, and one of the things that they all talk about was when Lombardi or Parcells, or I'll even use the Manchester United manager as well, because we have to, when they spoke, the individuals in the room thought that everything was being directed at them, and they didn't want to let that person down.
Right.
So the inspirational piece of wanting to work for that individual, I think is key. And I think that when we're thinking about how we influence, if we can inspire, then that will be the legacy.
So when you're looking for people who have that ability to inspire and have the ability to influence, whether it's as part of an internal program, you're looking to build staff and you're looking for influencers, you're looking for people to work with you on projects. What are you looking for? What's some of those key traits of a successful influencer?
I think key traits is the biggest one is keep promises, build trust. I think the minute you make a promise that you can't keep and that you don't keep, I think that trust has just gone, and any influence that you have has just gone out the window. I'm looking for people who have got who consider the listener. So I think in communication we have a default setting of this is how I like to communicate, and I actually think we need to reverse that. I think we need to understand, how does the person I'm trying to influence want to be communicated with? I've got a really good friend of mine. He's a director of sales. You try and communicate with him via email, it just doesn't work.
Right.
He has a thing when he comes back from holiday, he clicks at the top of his emails, clicks at the bottom of his emails, deletes the lot.
Yeah.
And works on the grounds if it was that important that it'd come to speak to me. Now, it doesn't matter whether we think that's good behaviour or bad behaviour. What matters is if I want to influence that individual, then I know I've got to go and make an appointment, go and see that person, go and do it face to face, and it's going to take some time. But I'm aware of that from a communication point of view. So I look for people who try and understand how to communicate with a range of people, and therefore have the ability to communicate with a range of people in different ways. Where some of it may well be, send me an email so I can actually do it. Right. And we have this where at work at the moment. It's like, just send me an email, put it in writing for me. I can't action it unless it's actually in front of me. And that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. It's just recognizing that everybody likes to have things differently.
Right.
I think one of the ways that we build trust is giving people comfort that we know what we're doing. So having knowledge about things. I think, as I've said before, the trying to engender the fact that we've done this several times. Here's what we've learned. Here's what we're going to do differently. And having that knowledge and belief and passion about what you're doing. I think the best influencers, and we've, as part of one of the papers that I've written, I interviewed a whole range of people from Australia and the UK around what is it that made people who they consider influential to be influential, and they all came back and said, look, it's a passion thing. You're going to really, if I can feel that you believe what you're saying, I'm going to go along with it, and I'm going to trust that your passion is well placed. I think, well, again, one of the things that they all came back and talked about was empathy and not sympathy, being able to sort of recognize the things that people have done rather than sympathize with them, and sort of like be in the same sort of shoes was key. And the amount of networking that the great influencers do, because one of the things that I think good influencers are able to deliver is if they don't know the answer themselves, they should know someone who knows that. And they'll almost act then as an intermediary to introduce various people together,
right,
to put people together who can do that. And I think that actually makes that person more influential to turn around and say, I don't know, but I know someone who can, and go and speak to such and such.
Yeah, so not necessarily that they know it all, but they're willing to put in the work to connect you with people who do.
Yeah, absolutely.
And something else I think was that you don't want people to fear that you're trying to influence them for the wrong reasons, or for reasons which aren't in their best interests.
Yeah, forcing someone to do what they don't want to do is a surefire way to A, lose influence, and B, some of the people that I'm aware of, make sure that'll make sure that they never do it.
Right. It kind of goes back to your earlier point about alignment. So making sure that when you're trying to influence, that you're actually aligned on the same goals. It may be that you've got different approaches of getting there, but generally speaking, you want to have at least some similarities between what you're trying to do, or else it kind of makes it exponentially more difficult. Yeah,
the alignment is key, and that's why was it the second habit? Begin with the end in mind. Know where you want to end up. Know the goal, not necessarily the journey. Is really important.
So just thinking about another example, I have a stakeholder, and obviously I think this is something we're all familiar with. We have a stakeholder that you try and influence, they want absolutely nothing to do with you. They come and say, well, I'm good on my own, thanks, have no need for procurement. How do you teach professionals to start breaking down the wall, to start getting influence? It's not something that's going to happen overnight, but at least start to be able to have a conversation so they can start educating that stakeholder on what you could actually do for them.
That stakeholder sounds like marketing, which is the traditional bastion of procurement. Right. I never want you to do anything for me.
Right.
Generally, what I'd say to people is the first thing is ask lots and lots of questions. Neil Rackham talks about the best negotiators are the ones who say very little but ask an awful lot of questions, because what we're trying to do there is to get the other side to talk. And what are we trying to get them to reveal? I want them to know, so why are they doing so well? Because let's not take the fact that we know everything here. They may be doing something that if we actually did something similar in a different area, we might be able to improve our service. So I think I want to know what it is that they are doing so well. And everybody's got a pain point. Everyone's got a problem. Everyone's got something that they really dislike. And it may well be that they want to get access to a different supplier, but they just don't know how to do it yet, and they don't want to admit it. And I think that there are some things that we can maybe say, so what is it that you're currently doing that you don't want to do? And maybe we can start to sort of like gain some trust there. But with all of these stakeholders, it's all around gaining the trust and proving ourselves to be knowledgeable and useful at what we do. And so I'd say that for every stakeholder, the beginning is always asking lots of questions. Good tool to help us figure that out, by the way, is Johari Window. Okay. I don't know if anyone's Johari Window is a great planning tool. Two guys, Joseph Ingham, Harry Luft, Joe Harry, that's named after. And it's, if you remember Donald Rumsfeld's speech, there are some things that we know, and some things that we don't know. Okay. So the way this works is there are things that we know and things that the other person knows. This is Rumsfeld, this is known knowns, as Johari Window says, this is in the arena. But then there are some things that we know we don't know, and it's the things that you don't know are brilliant, because if you know you don't know them, what can you go and do? You can go and find out.
You can ask questions.
You ask questions.
Research.
You link. What is it that I don't know about this stakeholder that I need to find out? I either research or I get some questions aligned to it. And then there are some things that you don't know. I don't know what I don't know. The unknown unknowns. The great things with those is the minute you start thinking about them, you've just turned them into a known unknown. So that's what I would actually say is Johari Window, JOHARI Window. It's all free on the web. It's not my IP. I would be using that for every planning meeting that I have, from a stakeholder meeting to a negotiation.
Interesting. I'm going to link up to those. I'll give out the URL later, but I'll definitely link up to that in the show notes so that listeners can go and check that out.
Great.
So as we start to wrap up, I have a final question. It's a hypothetical situation, really, but it's one that people may, find themselves in or be able to empathize with. A procurement professional has all the fundamental procurement skills, but as things evolve, we talked about the evolution of the profession. They're worried about how they can become more valuable to their stakeholder, and ultimately, that means more valuable to their business. How do you recommend they start to think about the development that brings them the skills and the capabilities they need to go to that next level?
I think the first thing that I would say to everybody, wherever you are in your procurement journey, your procurement career, is you own your own development. Mm-hmm. I wouldn't wait around for anybody to do it for you. It's your development, you own it. And so if it's yours, the first thing you probably need to understand is recognize how you actually learn, because everybody learns differently. And I think that's a fault of a lot of L&D programs that do get put together. It focuses on one aspect and one way of learning and one style of delivery. And I think there's multiple. So there's lots of free resources around understanding how you learn, be it are you best someone who reflects on things? Are you a reader? Are you a doer? Do you need to have things presented audio, or are you a visual person? So there's lots and lots of things that you can do to consider that. But I'll start with recognizing the ways that you do learn and the ways that you don't. And then when you're putting together your development plan, or you're working with your manager or your mentor to have a development plan, I would say getting that balance, and we've probably all heard of the 70-20-10 rule. So only 10% of what we should be doing should be sort of formalized training.
Right.
Either going to a training course or doing qualifications. And I think sometimes it gets focused on that. I've got a gap in this area. What training course am I going to do? There's lots of ways to help develop that you can take ownership of yourself. Mm-hmm. This podcast, for instance, is a development tool for people. So consider the 70 and the 20, the getting exposure to areas and the experience of areas. Consider it's not just about training. Obviously, understanding where you want to get to, so where your gaps in your skills are. I think is clearly essential. But the thing to remember when you're putting together a development program is that most gap closure programs take 2 to 3 years to actually close the gap, and people look at gaps that they currently have. One of the goals that you should be having is thinking about, well, where do you want to be in 2, 3, 4 years' time? Yeah. Where do you want your people to be in 2, 3, 4 years' time? Because otherwise, you're just in a cycle all the time. We've caught up, but we're still 2 years behind.
You're training people to be where you want them today, not where you want them to be tomorrow.
Exactly. Yeah. So that's probably what I'd say is think about how you learn. Think about where you're going to be in the future, and have balance amongst the different things that you're going to do, from having acting up in certain areas, from stretch projects to education, to training programs. Let's not say that they're not useful, because they really are. Mm-hmm. Let's think about e-learning activities. Let's think about workshops and understand the difference between the two. The key for me on workshops is always the application. So in consulting, they talk about first 100 days are really important. What does the new person's first 100 days look like? And I'm sure when the new president gets sworn in, the first 100 days, and I'm a West Wing devotee, and they talk about the first 100 days being critical. For training, I talk about the first 100 hours.
Right.
From when you leave that training room, there's 100 hours available before you start to forget what's going on and how to do it. So the earlier you can apply the stuff that you've learnt in that program, the better. And if you can actually apply it in the program itself, then you'll find that those skills and those behaviors get changed, because it's only through repetition do we change behavior. Right. So the earlier we start the repetition, the better.
How, and this is going off a little bit of a tangent, but how have you been successful in inspiring people to want to develop their own capabilities?
Hopefully by making it fun. I mean, not just the actual events themselves, but I think procurement is fascinating and fun. I mean, I think we all do. I think that's the reason why we're in the roles that we do in the profession that we love. Because I think procurement done well changes the world. Procurement done badly changes the world as well, but for different reasons. But procurement done well can have a positive effect on the world. And what's more fun than that?
No, I completely agree. And that's kind of one of the things that inspires us, I think, on a day-to-day basis, both in the profession, but also in kind of sharing experiences with others. So we're coming against the clock. I just have a last question, which is more housekeeping. If listeners are interested in learning a little bit more and following up, reaching out to you directly, where can they find you?
You can find me on LinkedIn. Mm-hmm. You can find me on Twitter at gdonovan1971. If I give you my year of birth. So those are the two areas really. LinkedIn, I've got my profile's up on LinkedIn, and I'm always happy to take emails through LinkedIn. You'll find on my LinkedIn links to articles that I've written about influencing, and also around understanding your learning styles, plus a few other areas as well. Yeah. So that's the best place to get hold of me.
Okay, great. Well, I'm going to link up as well to the articles that you wrote around influence, because those were my influence in terms of our conversation today. And those are going to be at artofprocurement.com/influence, ironically enough. That's artofprocurement.com/influence. So Gordon, just thank you very much for your time today. I just really appreciate you coming on the show.
Thanks, Phil. I really enjoyed it.
Hi there, it's Phil here again, and I hope you really enjoyed the conversation with Gordon. Before I go, I just wanted to remind you of the address to check out the Art of Procurement Patron program that I talked about at the beginning. It's artofprocurement.com/patron. That's artofprocurement.com/patron. Thank you very much, and I'll talk to you again soon. Thank you for listening to another episode of The Art of Procurement. To find an archive of all past episodes, you can go to artofprocurement.com/episodes. And to ensure you never miss another show, go to artofprocurement.com/subscribe.